This is how the breakfast bar has looked for the last 6 months, 7 months, something like that. What I need to do to finish it is to add some cubbies at one end and a piece to cover up the back of the stove and all of the wiring, and then the bar and the drawers. But the first thing I'll show is the structure that holds up the backsplash in the kitchen. And I did this before the countertop went in, while we were working on the kitchen. And then once that's done, I'll do the cubbies and then the piece that covers up the stove. And that'll be this video. And then I think that the next video will be the bar and the drawers. So before the countertop went in, I had to make a piece that the backsplash behind the stove could attach to. And this would be the piece that would hold the drawers up in the breakfast bar and be just below the bar or just below the countertop of the breakfast bar. So the main structure is a piece that runs behind and above the cabinet all the way along that side of the kitchen. And it had to fit over the drawer box that goes into the corner of that part of the cabinets. So I had to cut out sort of an L-shaped piece for that section. And this part of the countertop is longer than 8 feet, so I had to splice together the plywood to get the 10-foot section that I needed. And I got to use one of my really long clamps. Since this section isn't going to be seen, I really could have screwed some cleats to the piece of plywood and then clamped the cleats together if I didn't have the long clamp. Now, when I was making this, I wanted to make the support for the drawers, and they would attach to the long piece that I just made. But I realized once I had it all together and the countertop was in, I really should have left these off and attached them with pocket screws later, because for the last 6 or 7 months they've been sort of hanging out in the dining room. I've been so worried that someone's going to bump one of them and tear one of them off and ruin the backsplash in the kitchen. But this is how I did it, where this was sort of a complete system, and I just attached this to the back of the cabinets. And that's how it sat for the last 7 months or so. Now the next part to make are the cubbies that are going to go next to the drawers that'll be in this setup. And really this is pretty simple. It's just some shelves and a box. So I cut some dados for the shelves. And I cut a back piece. And I glued and stapled that to the back. Now I also cut a dado for the piece of plywood that'll be the cover for the back of the stove, which you can see there on the side of the box. This will be attached to the rest of the cabinets with pocket screws at the shelves. So the screws will help hold the shelves up at that corner and hold the whole box to the rest of the cabinetry. And then there was some trim to go on, or basically some edge banding, which is 1/4-inch thick maple. Now for the piece that's going to cover the back of the stove, it's also going to go over a vent that's near the floor. And I'd like to have access to the gas shutoff valve for the stove. So I made a test piece to see how this would work, and it seemed like it worked okay. Once I had that set up, I could cut the actual piece that's going to go behind the stove, which will be a piece of 3/4-inch birch plywood. I cut the vent and the little door for the gas shutoff valve on the CNC machine. And since I had the pattern working just fine, what took a little time was making sure it was in the right spot on the big sheet of plywood. And the vent is just the router cutting lines so that the holes are actually just the thickness of the 1/2-inch router bed, which worked just fine. So once I had that cut, I sanded the outer surface. Now when we were laying this out and sort of planning this side of the kitchen, we had thought this would be painted white like the wall, and it would match the wall. But once I started putting it together, it seemed like it made more sense to make it just finished plywood like the rest of the cabinetry. So I ended up sanding it and then putting on just a clear finish onto the plywood. And it turned out actually being really close to the pre-finished plywood that I had gotten for the rest of the cabinetry. And I brought it upstairs to kind of see if it would fit. And you can see the gas shutoff valve behind the little opening. Now that the panel is ready, I can make the door that's going to go into the opening for the gas shutoff valve. I thought it would be sort of fun to do an actual little door, so it would almost seem like someone lived down there below the kitchen. So I made a little door with an arched top with some windows in it. And I cut a piece of plexiglass that will fit into the door. The first pass, my setup was wrong and I cut too deep on my first attempt. So on the second try, it worked. But I now have a nice circle in my CNC table. And I sanded the plexiglass on the disc sander. And at the same time, I sanded the door and got that a little more finished. I found that my smallest sanding sleeve on the spindle sander was the same size as the router bit I used, so I could actually get into the window spaces on the door nicely. And I sanded a little more. That kind of worked. And some finish on the door. You can see how the plexiglass fits into the back of the window on the door. Now I thought about doing some little clips around the edge of the plexiglass, and then I realized I could just do a single screw at the center, and this would hold it in place just fine. And I can put the hinges on. I realized I really don't have the tools for small work like this. I'm really not a jeweler. Putting the hinges on the door was the easy part. It's putting the hinges into the panel that was even more difficult. A perfect place for some window shims. I keep a lot of window shims in the shop. I find them really useful. So for something like this, I can hold the door up off the panel at exactly the right height, so that the cylinder part of the hinge can be centered between the door and the panel when I drill the holes for the hinges into the panel. If this is done just right, then the door will sit flush with the panel that it sits in. I was doing a project a year or so ago with hinges, and someone mentioned getting Vicks bits, I think that's what they're called, for centering the hole in the center of the hole in the hinge, so that the screw falls in the center of the hole of the hinge. So I got some, and they work pretty well. They're definitely better than just doing it by eye. Now to actually install the panel on the back of the cabinetry, I needed to add a little bit of extra depth to my shims at the top, so that the panel will line up with the dado that I cut in the cubby box. Then I need a cleat on the floor to attach it to as well. And I'll put the panel in place with just a couple of screws. I guess 5 screws. I can hold it in place. 3 along the top and then 2 on the bottom. And it's installed. The door seems to work. I'm not sure whether I should do a little doorknob for the door. It would be cute to have the little doorknob on there, but it's also such a flush, sort of clean design. I don't want to draw too much attention to it. And the door comes in handy for some. So in the next video, I'll do the drawers, the drawer faces, and the bar top. And then we should be pretty close to done with the breakfast bar and the kitchen. Thanks for watching.